It was supposed to be a celebration of love, our anniversary, but instead I received a gift I never imagined, a divorce. My husband, the man I once thought I knew, handed me a piece of paper, a cold declaration that shattered everything. And the worst part? It wasn't his decision. It was his mother's. Before we dive into today's story, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an amazing story. And if you're already part of the family, thank you for being here. Let's get started with today's incredible journey. Emily Carter had always believed in love, the kind of love that lasts forever, the kind she thought she'd found with Ethan. Their first meeting had been magical, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together. From their first date, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. Emily's smile could light up a room, and Ethan, with his tall frame and kind eyes, always knew how to make her feel like the most special woman in the world. Their relationship was full of laughter, deep conversations, and moments of pure joy. He would surprise her with flowers for no reason, and she would laugh at his little jokes. Their connection seemed unbreakable, built on trust, love, and shared dreams. They talked about their future together, children, houses, vacations. Emily had envisioned growing old with Ethan, feeling safe in his arms, surrounded by love. When Ethan proposed, it felt like a dream come true. Emily had never been so certain of anything in her life. Their wedding day was a fairy tale, a perfect day. She wore a beautiful white gown, and Ethan stood at the altar, his face glowing with pride as he watched her walk down the aisle. They said their vows, surrounded by family and friends, and Emily was certain that this would be the beginning of a lifelong journey, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened on their first wedding anniversary. Emily had planned a special celebration, hoping to relive the magic of their wedding day. She had carefully picked a romantic restaurant, one they had talked about going to for months. The evening started off as any other: candlelight, soft music, and their favorite dishes. But as the night wore on, Emily noticed a change in Ethan. He seemed distant, his once warm smile replaced with a faint, uneasy expression. His answers were short, and he wasn't the Ethan she had married. Emily tried to ignore the unease gnawing at her, convincing herself that maybe it was just stress from work. But something felt wrong. And then, as they finished their meal, Ethan reached for a small envelope from his jacket pocket. At first, Emily thought it was a letter, maybe a sweet note or a small gift to commemorate their special day. But when Ethan placed the envelope in front of her, she saw the word divorce printed on it. Her breath caught in her throat. It felt like time had stopped. The world around her seemed to blur. This was not happening, not on their anniversary, not after everything they had shared. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope, and the paper inside confirmed the unimaginable. "I want a divorce," Ethan had written, his handwriting cold and impersonal. The words burned her eyes as her heart shattered into pieces. How could this be happening? Why now? What had she done to deserve this? She searched Ethan's face for any sign of remorse, but there was nothing. His eyes were blank, as if he were a stranger sitting across from her, not the man she had married. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just transpired, but there was no logic to it. How could someone she trusted so completely, someone she had built her future with, so easily walk away? And then, like a cruel twist of fate, the truth hit her. This was not entirely Ethan's decision. The woman who had always been at the center of his life, his mother, had orchestrated this nightmare. It was at her insistence that Ethan had come to this decision. Emily had always known his mother, Barbara, had a controlling presence in their marriage, but she never imagined it would go this far. Emily's heart raced as the reality of the situation settled in. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. The world had become a blur of voices, noise, and confusion. Her gaze remained locked on the divorce papers, but nothing about them felt real. This had to be a nightmare. It had to be. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. The word barely escaped her lips, trembling with disbelief. She searched his face for any trace of guilt, regret, anything that would suggest this was just a mistake, but his expression remained empty, almost robotic. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her eyes. "Emily, I'm sorry, but this is what I have to do. You have to understand." She blinked, feeling the sharp sting of his words as they cut through her heart. "What do you mean you have to do this?" Her mind raced with questions, but the most important one blared like a siren in her head. Why? Why would you do this? But he wasn't giving her answers. Ethan's lips trembled as he opened his mouth, but the words came out slowly, as if they had been rehearsed 1,000 times before. "My mom. She's been telling me for a while now. She doesn't think we're right for each other. She believes this marriage is a mistake." Emily's breath caught in her chest. She wanted to scream, to yell, to demand that Ethan fight for their marriage, fight for her. But instead, she sat there, frozen, as if the words had robbed her of all strength. "His mother?" Emily thought, the words echoing in her mind. She had always known that Barbara Carter held a certain power over her son, but she never imagined it would go this far. Ethan's voice continued, soft and distant, as though he were speaking from somewhere far away. "She said you weren't the right match for me. She said we weren't meant to be." The weight of his words hit her like a slap. Every ounce of trust, every moment she had believed in the love they shared, began to unravel before her eyes. How could he let his mother do this? Emily had spent so many years trying to make him understand how important it was to build a life together without the constant shadow of his mother hanging over them. Yet here he was, letting her destroy everything. Barbara Carter, the woman who had always held an unspoken power over their relationship, the woman who had been critical of Emily from the very start. Emily had always brushed off the comments and remarks, telling herself that they didn't matter. But now, in this moment, it became clear Barbara had been slowly eroding Ethan's resolve, convincing him that Emily wasn't the right woman for him. A wave of anger washed over Emily. She felt betrayed, not just by Ethan, but by Barbara. How could she do this? How could she break up her son's marriage, interfere in their life like this? It was a line Emily had never thought would be crossed, but here they were, her dreams of a future with Ethan crumbling in an instant. "I never thought she'd come between us," Emily said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I never thought you'd listen to her over me." Ethan remained silent. His eyes darted to the table, his hands clasped tightly together. He couldn't look her in the eye. That, more than anything, broke her heart. "Is this what you really want?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was begging him, pleading with him for some kind of sign that he was still the man she had married. But he didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth hung in the air like an unbearable weight. He was no longer the person she thought he was. He had allowed his mother to pull the strings, to dictate the course of their lives. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to cry for him. She wasn't going to let her heart break for someone who couldn't even fight for her. This wasn't love. Love didn't tear someone apart, especially not on the day they were supposed to celebrate their love. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Emily stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, breaking the suffocating quiet. She looked at Ethan one last time, her heart heavy with betrayal. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice strong despite the crushing pain inside. "You don't get to destroy everything because of your mother's control." With that, Emily turned away. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Ethan wasn't the man she had married anymore. The man she had trusted had been replaced by someone she didn't recognize, and all of it, every ounce of it, had been orchestrated by his mother. The woman who had always been there in the background, subtly pulling the strings. Emily walked out of the restaurant, the night air biting her skin. The world felt wrong, like she was walking in someone else's life, but it was hers, and this was her reality now. Her marriage was over, and there was nothing she could do to change it. Emily had always thought she and Ethan were a team, a partnership that could weather any storm. From the moment they met, it was as if the universe had aligned to bring them together. They shared similar values, interests, and dreams. They talked about their future together, kids, houses, travel, and everything in between. Their bond was built on trust, communication, and shared happiness, but as with many relationships, the perfect facade didn't last forever. Ethan was the kind of man who believed in doing things the right way. He had grown up in a family where structure and tradition were important. His mother, Barbara, had always been at the center of their home, her voice carrying the most weight. While his father, Jack, was a kind man, he had always been a passive presence in the family. Barbara's voice was the one that was heard, her opinions the ones that mattered. Ethan had always respected his mother, never questioning her choices or her actions. As a child, he had looked to her for guidance, and as he grew older, that sense of dependence only deepened. He loved her, of course, but somewhere along the way he stopped learning to think for himself. Every decision, big or small, was filtered through his mother's lens. And when it came to his relationship with Emily, Barbara's opinion was the only one that mattered. At first, when Emily and Ethan started dating, Barbara seemed to be supportive. She would invite Emily over for dinners and chat about trivial things, but there was always a subtle undercurrent of judgment. Emily, being young and in love, didn't pick up on the small digs and backhanded compliments. She was too focused on her budding relationship to notice the simmering tension beneath the surface. The real trouble began when Emily and Ethan started talking about marriage. Barbara had always been a woman who believed in control. Control over the household, control over her son's life. And Emily was beginning to realize, too late, that her place in Ethan's life was being measured and scrutinized in a way she hadn't imagined. The first signs of trouble came when Barbara began making unsolicited comments about Emily's career. "Maybe you should focus on your work more, Emily. After all, a woman's role is to support her husband, not get too ambitious." These comments, wrapped in a veil of concern, were more like subtle attempts to push Emily into a mold that Barbara had created. It wasn't until Emily was engaged to Ethan that she began to understand the true depth of Barbara's control. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Emily?" Barbara had asked one day, just weeks before the wedding. Her words were coated with a fake sweetness, but Emily had learned to hear the skepticism behind them. "Marriage is a lifelong commitment. It's not just about love, you know. It's about sacrifice. I hope you're ready for that." Emily had dismissed it at the time, telling herself that Barbara was just being overprotective of her son. She had convinced herself that once they were married, Barbara would come to accept her as part of the family. But she was wrong. The weeks following their wedding were filled with passive-aggressive comments and subtle attempts to undermine Emily's place in the family. Barbara would call Ethan late at night, talking to him for hours about trivial matters, while Emily sat alone in their apartment, trying to make sense of the growing wedge between her and her husband. Emily tried to confront Ethan about his mother's interference, but every time she did, he would dismiss it, telling her that his mother was just overly concerned, or that she meant well. He would make excuses for Barbara, defending her actions without ever considering the toll it was taking on their marriage. Emily began to feel isolated, alone in a relationship that was slowly unraveling before her eyes. She tried to make it work, to find ways to blend her life with Ethan's family, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being suffocated by Barbara's presence. When Ethan proposed the idea of buying a house together, Barbara immediately began inserting herself into the decision-making process. She had her own opinion on every house they considered, offering unsolicited advice on interior design and even vetoing some properties because they weren't good enough for her son. Emily felt like an outsider in her own marriage, as if her opinion didn't matter. And then came the fateful anniversary. Emily had planned the evening meticulously, hoping to create a special moment for her and Ethan. She was determined to make the night perfect, to show Ethan how much she loved him and how much she wanted to make their marriage work. She never imagined that it would be the night that would end it all. But in hindsight, Emily realized that the cracks had been there all along. She had ignored the warning signs, the constant interference, the emotional distance, the inability to stand up for her. And now, sitting in the restaurant with the divorce papers in front of her, she could see it clearly. Ethan had never truly chosen her over his mother. He had always been bound to her, shackled by his loyalty and his fear of disappointing her, and Emily had never stood a chance. The realization hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was angry. Angry at Ethan for allowing this to happen, angry at Barbara for manipulating her son, and angry at herself for not seeing the truth sooner. But this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about control. It was about how Barbara had wielded her power over Ethan for years, turning him into someone unrecognizable. It was about how Emily had been pushed aside, left to fight for her place in a marriage that had never truly been hers to begin with. As Emily sat there, tears threatening to spill, she made a decision. She wouldn't let this break her. She wouldn't let this be the end of her. It was time to reclaim her life, to find herself again, away from the manipulation and control. She wasn't just losing Ethan. She was losing the version of herself that had let his mother dictate her happiness. The days following the anniversary were a blur of numbness and confusion for Emily. She had never felt so lost in her entire life. The reality of her marriage ending at the hands of Ethan, at the behest of his mother, was something she couldn't seem to escape. Every corner of their apartment, every shared memory, every piece of their life together felt like a constant reminder of her failure. The house they had planned to buy together was no longer just a dream. It was a ghost of what could have been. It wasn't just the divorce that tore her apart. It was the sense of betrayal, the realization that she had been living a lie. All those years of love, laughter, and shared dreams suddenly felt like a cruel joke. How had she missed the signs? How had she not seen that Ethan was never fully hers to begin with? The apartment, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a prison. Every morning, Emily would wake up and stare at the empty space beside her in bed, the spot where Ethan used to sleep. She missed the way he would curl around her in the night, the way they'd wake up to lazy mornings, laughing and talking about their plans. Now, the silence in that bed was deafening. There were moments when Emily couldn't breathe. The weight of everything crashing down on her was suffocating. She felt the sharp sting of the divorce papers every time she saw them, lying on the kitchen counter, a cold reminder of how her world had been shattered in an instant. The tears came in waves, sometimes uncontrollable, sometimes quiet, but always there, lurking beneath the surface. But it wasn't just the emotional pain that she struggled with. It was the feeling of being discarded. The person she had trusted with her heart, the person she had chosen to spend her life with, had so easily handed her a divorce. And the worst part? He had done it under the influence of his mother, the woman who had always been a quiet presence in their lives, now revealed as the true cause of their demise. As the days wore on, Emily tried to pick up the pieces of her life, but the cracks were too deep. She reached out to her friends, but nothing seemed to help. Rachel was there for her, of course, always the supportive best friend, but even Rachel couldn't fill the emptiness inside her. The phone calls, the late-night talks, the hugs, none of them could undo the damage that had been done. Emily had been betrayed by the person she loved most, and no amount of comfort could change that. At night, when the weight of the world pressed down on her, Emily would find herself lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. How had it come to this? She thought about the early days of their relationship, the laughter, the promises. She remembered how Ethan had once promised her that no one would ever come between them, that they were stronger than any obstacle. But in the end, it wasn't just his mother who had torn them apart. It was his inability to choose her over everything else. Emily tried to talk to him. She called him several times in the first few days after the divorce, hoping he would explain, hoping he would apologize, hoping there was something left of the man she had married. But every time she reached out, he was distant, cold. His words were hollow, as if he had already moved on. There was no remorse, no fight in him. And with every unanswered call, every cold conversation, Emily felt the last threads of hope slipping away. She thought about confronting Barbara, about confronting the woman who had manipulated Ethan into ending their marriage. But something inside her knew it would be pointless. Barbara had already won. She had succeeded in breaking them apart, in making Ethan believe that Emily was the problem, and confronting her wouldn't change that. Emily realized that any confrontation with Barbara would be nothing more than an exercise in futility. She could no longer focus on the whys and hows. She couldn't keep replaying the events over and over in her head, searching for a reason that made sense. There was no making sense of betrayal. There was no justification for what had happened. The truth was simple. Ethan had chosen his mother over her, and that was something Emily could never forgive. In the midst of the pain, Emily started to make a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep waiting for Ethan to realize what he had lost. She had to find a way to heal, to rebuild her life. But that was easier said than done. How do you move on when everything you thought you knew is gone? How do you pick up the pieces when your heart feels like it's been broken beyond repair? There were moments when Emily felt weak, when she thought she might never recover from the heartbreak. But slowly, ever so slowly, she began to find strength in the most unlikely places. She started to rediscover herself, to find parts of her that had been buried under the weight of her marriage. She began to focus on her work, her passions, the things that had once brought her joy before Ethan and his family had consumed her life. It wasn't easy, but Emily started to reclaim her identity piece by piece. She spent more time with Rachel, allowing herself to laugh again, to feel joy, even if it was just for a moment. She started doing the things she loved, things she had put on hold in the pursuit of her marriage, and little by little, the brokenness inside her began to heal. But there was still anger. There was still a deep well of rage that Emily hadn't yet confronted. She was angry at Ethan for not fighting for her, for not standing up to his mother. She was angry at Barbara for poisoning their relationship, for manipulating Ethan into believing that Emily wasn't enough. And most of all, she was angry at herself for allowing it to happen. She had trusted Ethan blindly, never questioning the hold his mother had over him, never imagining that one day she would be the one left out in the cold. Emily knew that the road to healing would be long and painful. She knew that there were days ahead when she would feel weak, when the anger and sadness would overwhelm her. But for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a spark of hope. She was not defeated. She would rise again. The betrayal had nearly broken her, but it would not define her. Emily Carter was stronger than that. And though it would take time, she would rebuild her life, stronger and wiser, without the shadow of Ethan and his mother looming over her. Weeks passed, but the pain never really subsided. Emily had started to rebuild her life, but there was still a lingering ache in her chest, an emptiness that refused to be filled. The anger she had once felt at Ethan and his mother was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. She had started to embrace her independence, but the wounds of betrayal ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. One evening, just as Emily was about to settle into bed, she received a call. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her it was important. With a hesitant breath, she answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but strained. "Emily, it's Ethan." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from him in over a month. She had stopped reaching out, stopped hoping for any sign of the man she once loved. Yet here he was, calling her, sounding different, guilt and uncertainty clouding his voice. "Ethan," she said, trying to mask the anger in her tone. "Why are you calling?" He hesitated before responding, his voice faltering. I need to talk to you. It's important." Emily felt a surge of emotions, surprise, disbelief, and yes, even a trace of hope. What could he possibly want now? The man who had torn her life apart was calling her out of the blue, after months of silence. Was he finally going to apologize? Was he finally going to acknowledge the hurt he had caused? But as much as she wanted to hang up, to reject him completely, a part of her, perhaps the part that still clung to the love she had once felt for him, wanted to hear what he had to say. "Fine," she said, her voice cold but steady. "Say what you need to say." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Emily could almost feel the tension in the silence. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice cracking. "I've been thinking about everything, about what I did. And I realized something. I've been a coward. I let my mother control me, and I let you down. I know it's too late, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for hurting you, for letting her destroy what we had." Emily's heart ached at the words, but she couldn't let herself soften just yet. She had been hurt too deeply to let him off the hook so easily. "Sorry? Is that all you have to say? You destroyed my life, Ethan. You let your mother manipulate you and you chose her over me. For what? To keep the peace? To make her happy?" Her voice wavered as the anger surged within her, but she held it together. "Do you have any idea what it's been like, Ethan? To live in the shadows of your mother's control? To be the one who was always second in your life? I loved you. I gave you everything, and you let her take it all away." There was another pause. Ethan didn't have an immediate answer, and that silence spoke volumes. It told Emily everything she needed to know. He was still torn, still unable to choose her over his mother. "I should have never let her come between us," he said, his voice thick with regret. "But I was weak, and now I'm paying the price." Emily closed her eyes, her head spinning. This was the moment she had been waiting for, wasn't it? The apology, the confession of guilt, the chance for Ethan to prove he was the man she had once loved. But as the words settled in, she realized something she had refused to see before. The apology wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the months of emotional abuse, the pain, the humiliation. It wasn't enough to rebuild the trust that had been shattered beyond repair. "No, Ethan," Emily said, her voice steady but firm. "You don't get to apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. I've been broken. I've been shattered by the choices you made, and I can't just forgive you. Not like that." Ethan's voice cracked as he tried to interrupt, but she wouldn't let him. "You've made your choice," Emily continued, her heart pounding. "You've chosen her over me. You've let her control your life. And now you expect me to just forget all of that and take you back. I'm not that person anymore, Ethan. I'm not the person who will put you first while you continue to let her control everything. I'm sorry, but I can't do this." There was silence on the line, and Emily knew that Ethan had no more words, no more excuses, no more justifications. This was the end. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when she let go of everything, the moment when she realized that she deserved better. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she held the phone to her ear. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I hope you find peace with your mother, but I'm moving on. I can't be the woman you need me to be anymore." She hung up the phone, her heart racing as the finality of it all hit her. Ethan was gone. His mother was gone. All the dreams she had once built with him, the future she had imagined, were gone. But in that moment, Emily realized something. She wasn't broken anymore. She wasn't the person who had clung to a toxic love, to a man who had chosen his mother over her. She was stronger than that. She was finally free. After the call, Emily felt a strange sense of peace. It was the closure she didn't think she needed. But now that she had it, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. She had said goodbye, not just to Ethan, but to the life she had envisioned with him. She had let go of the person she thought she would spend forever with, and in doing so, she had taken back her life. The days that followed weren't easy, but Emily was determined not to let the hurt define her. She found herself waking up with more clarity each day, no longer burdened by the ghost of her marriage. She stopped checking her phone for messages from Ethan, stopped wondering if he would come to his senses. Instead, she focused on herself, on healing and rediscovering the person she had been before Ethan and his mother had consumed her world. She spent more time with Rachel, who had been her rock throughout this ordeal. They laughed together, talked about the future, and slowly, Emily began to feel like herself again. She revisited old hobbies that she had pushed aside during her marriage: painting, writing, hiking in the local park. Each moment she spent doing something for herself reminded her of the strength she had within, the resilience she had forgotten she possessed. At work, Emily found herself more focused, more determined. Her colleagues noticed a change in her. She was confident, sharp, and her creativity began to flow freely again. She threw herself into her career, excelling in ways she hadn't before. There were moments when the pain of the past crept in, but instead of dwelling on it, Emily used those moments as fuel. She realized that she had so much more to offer the world than she had ever allowed herself to believe. In time, Emily started dating again. Not seriously, but she allowed herself to meet new people, to see the world through a fresh lens. She wasn't looking for another man to complete her, but she wasn't closed off to the idea of love either. She understood now that love wasn't about sacrifice and submission. It was about partnership, equality, and mutual respect. She wouldn't settle for anything less. And then, one evening, Emily was walking through the city, lost in thought as she admired the sunset. She came across a small cafe that she had visited often with Ethan during their early days together. It brought back bittersweet memories, memories of the person she had once been and the dreams she had once shared with him. But as she stood there, looking at the warm glow of the cafe, she realized something important. She didn't need those memories anymore. She had new ones to create, new adventures to experience. Her life wasn't defined by her past, nor would it be dictated by Ethan or his mother. It was her own, and it was time for her to take control of it. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Emily moved to a new apartment in a different part of town, closer to the things she loved. She traveled to places she had always wanted to see, filling her life with joy and experiences that had nothing to do with the broken marriage she had left behind. With every step, Emily grew stronger, more sure of who she was and who she wanted to become. And then one day, as she sat on a park bench, sipping coffee and watching the world go by, Emily realized that she had finally found peace. She had healed. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, and though it hadn't been easy, she was proud of who she had become. There were still days when she missed the idea of what could have been with Ethan, but she had learned that sometimes the hardest part of letting go wasn't the love you once shared. It was learning to love yourself again, and Emily had done just that. As she looked up at the sky, she whispered to herself, "I'm okay. I'm more than okay." If you've ever faced betrayal or felt like you were living someone else's life, know that you're not alone. Letting go can be painful, but it's also the first step toward finding yourself again. If you've found strength in Emily's story, share your own in the comments below. Let's support each other on this journey of healing. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, resilience, and new beginnings.